2016, Hailee Steinfeld, a pop star well known for her roles in Pitch Perfect 2 and Pitch Perfect 3, starred in The Edge of 17, a coming-of-age teen dramedy that's Google synopsis begins with, "Everyone knows that growing up is hard." While this video is ultimately positive, at first glance, this film seems no different from the typical greenlit by Netflix schlock that comes out of this genre. Over the years, teen movies have become very similar to horror, in that while some are considered unaging classics with memorable themes and characters, the other 90% consist of the same tired, uninspired cliches and can usually be found at the back of a streaming service. In horror, it's the mindless jump scares and overused set pieces. With teen movies, it's a lot. Without even peeking at its extensive list on tvtropes.org, cliches found in teen-focused media are not that hard to name. Particularly, archetypes like the stuck-up pretty cheerleader, the popular douchey jock, and the kind standoffish nerd dominate the scene. These tropes, along with some others, have been overused to the point where most audiences are now entirely fatigued of their familiarity, and in response, this type of media has adopted a more ironic approach, paving way for comedies like Not Another Teen Movie, or if you like good films, Mean Girls. Movies like these satirize the predictable formula by either outright addressing the conventions they're parodying, or by cleverly mocking stereotypes to outline a powerful message. Point is, while these tropes are still around today, they've at least been turned on their head, spun around, and self-awarely dealt with several times before. That is to say, most of them. As the standard has shifted to twist many of these character types and their roles, one pattern that consistently plagues modern teen stories has remained relatively untouched. Yes, the frequent use of a whiny, overdramatic protagonist who spends most of the runtime complaining or making rash decisions is a norm that continues to bog down the genre. Though implementing a level of immaturity is necessary to write a realistic teenager, the way that leads in this kind of media tend to beg for the audience's sympathy and get a pass for all the wrong they've done is irritating and unsatisfying. From Disney Channel sitcoms to 13 Reasons Why, this trope has created somewhat of a stigma that coming-of-age narratives are no more than mopey pandering towards adolescent angst. The Edge of 17 only seems to further this notion. Opening the trailer with a suicide joke and playing a sad rendition of the Beatles song Help to accompany the plot of a girl finding out that her best friend and older brother slept together is a bad look for the film. But the on-screen lines of, "It may feel like the end of the world, it's just the beginning of growing up," do suggest something more. Sure, this girl seems like the typical melodramatic teen who feels her issues outweigh everything else. But they don't, and she discovers this for herself as the movie progresses. And yes, The Edge of 17 seems like your run-of-the-mill pity party dramedy. But the same realization Hailee Steinfeld eventually reaches in her story has appropriately occurred to me. First impressions aren't everything, and oftentimes you need to look from a different perspective to get the whole picture.
Are you ever gonna be who I thought you were?
On the surface, the characters in The Edge of 17 are all too familiar. The aforementioned jock, problematic parent, and awkward geek stereotypes are undeniably present here, in the forms of the brother Darian, widowed mother Mona, and classmate Erwin respectively. Additionally, Nick Mossman is the alluringly stoic school hunk, while Woody Harrelson's Mr. Bruner embodies the snarky, sarcastic teacher archetype. And at the center of it all, at least in her mind, is 17-year-old Nadine Franklin. We are first introduced to Nadine through narration at the beginning of the film that coincides with the mockably cynical and overly angsty tone prevalent in a majority of subpar teen media. In fact, traces can even be seen in this movie's own advertising. Generally, exposition presented through a direct voiceover like this tends to be a lazy way to get information across, especially if the narrating isn't consistent throughout. But The Edge of 17 uses this device to set up the very warped lens of its protagonist that the audience will be viewing much of the film through. So when Nadine says something in the opening trite enough to have its own TV tropes page,
around second grade, I had a realization. There are two types of people in this world. The people who radiate confidence and naturally excel at life.
Yes! Yes!
And the people who hope all those people die in a big explosion.
it is important to note that this truly acts as something Nadine believes rather than any kind of logic the film itself operates by. In other words, if that quote stood as anyone's greatest takeaway from the movie, I think a careful rewatch would be necessary. Although it's not initially apparent, that very line serves as the cornerstone of Nadine's broken philosophy. What's present on the surface is what permeates throughout. Everyone is exactly as they seem, and if someone doesn't act as miserable as she does, then they probably aren't. These assumptions that she has lived most of her life by are constantly tested as the story goes on. But despite her faulty rationale, Nadine, and even her line of thinking, is first made empathetic with this car flashback scene.
Okay, boss lady. See you tonight.
Nadine, we're not doing this again. You promised. Now get out of the car. Oh, that's it.
A few somber expressions from this young actress tell us that Nadine's refusal to leave isn't out of malice or spite, but due to genuine fear and anxiety that we see are entirely reasonable considering the way her peers treat her minutes later. Darian's immediate social acceptance and comparison sours our view of him right out of the gate and urges us to connect more so with his sister. To further this, the mother's instant impatience with the situation contrasts with the father's compassionate and understanding attitude.
All right, now. I know kids can be mean. But if you get a chance, fart into their backpacks.
I wish you were small.
Fittingly, the dad's ability to level with Nadine and see the world through her eyes implants a strong bond between the two.
What do I have that's any good? Tell me that. What have I ever had?
Hey, you have a lot. You have love. You have my love. Very soon you're going to have cheeseburgers. Oh, look. Did I not tell you? Cheeseburgers?
It is for this reason why his tragic death via heart attack is made all the more impactful, as Nadine is now left with only one person she's truly attached to, her best friend Krista. Through a montage, we see a certain relatability drives their friendship, in that both have their issues, but they always have each other's backs.
It turned out Krista's life wasn't perfect either.
This pudding is delicious.
I'm walking away.
What am I, your mother? Am I supposed to babysit
But
you on
we got each other through.
That is the case until one morning when this happens.
Oh my god! Oh my god! What the fuck?
Get out. Get out of my room, man. Just stop looking, man. Just get out.
Darian and Krista's hookup begins a harsh downward spiral for our main character, and frankly, why wouldn't it? For seemingly carefree Darian to take advantage of the one person Nadine closely relates to with inappropriate seductive actions would be unquestionably condemnable, wouldn't it? For Krista to abandon her longtime companion and abruptly devote all of her attention to someone new would be cruel and unloyal, wouldn't it? But to fully understand Nadine's mental and social decline following this event, we first need to look at her own reactions to it. Unsurprisingly, her initial response is to blame Darian completely, coming at him ruthlessly with various insults.
Go grow yourself a wispy mustache, you pervert, and stay away from my friends, okay?
Did you just say friends, plural?
Your head is too big for your body. It makes you look ridiculous, and you'll never be able to fix it.
As brutal as it is, this relentlessness is very knee-jerk, it happening only minutes after the discovery, and thus is to be expected. Besides, well-off conceited Darian doesn't need our sympathy, his sister is the victim here. More intriguing, however, is her interaction with Krista when they meet for lunch the next day. In spite of how a plot like this might normally play out, we see that Krista does not actually want to cut Nadine out of her life. Rather, she actively attempts to work everything out, even inviting her to a party in an effort to remain inclusive. In response, Nadine not only neglects her friend's sentiment, but also fails to hear her out altogether. She sets the scene by immaturely throwing a fit. And she never really gives Krista a chance to explain herself.
Why? Why do you even like him?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Is it a girl thing that, like, you hooked up with him, so now you're emotionally attached?
No.
Are you unconsciously mad at me, maybe? And this is like some kind of revenge?
Nadine.
Are you unconsciously mad at yourself? And this is some kind of self-punishment? Because if that's what it is, then we can really,
Will you
honestly,
stop talking because you're driving me insane?
towards Darian, this kind of behavior was justified, but the audience knows Krista has always been caring and can tell she isn't going anywhere, so Nadine's refusal to settle herself is frustrating. In the scene prior, it's also confirmed that the sexual exchange was instigated by both parties, so consent isn't an issue as previously suspected either. So if Krista doesn't leave her best friend in the dust, and Darian hasn't committed any moral wrong, then what could possibly be the cause of Nadine's emotional descent as the film continues? This line holds that answer.
I want you to think about how shitty this is for me.
Nadine turns down compromise because she can only see the situation from her perspective. If you recall, she has a hard time recognizing problems in others' lives, so any good the relationship could do for Krista is greatly overshadowed by the drawbacks it'll have on herself. And so, it is finally clear that Nadine's numerous misfortunes down the line are a direct result of her blatant selfishness and inability to place herself in others' shoes. Behavior that is perpetuated by the previously mentioned cynical mentality that she adopted from a young age. This is further cemented with the two's final argument after the party. While it's true that Krista didn't invite Nadine along for beer pong, her apology is cut short in this scene by some hurtful hostility.
And you toss me aside? The person who's had your back since second grade? Who's been with you through everything? You know what? Yeah, fine.
Yeah,
because
that's
chances
what
are,
happened.
those pricks, they're not gonna give a shit about you when Darian drops your ass for someone hotter.
And when this is invalidated by news of Darian taking Krista to prom, Nadine unnecessarily dramatizes things by forcing her friend to choose a side, effectively destroying the two's relationship all by herself.
You can't can't have both. It's me or him. Pick.
No, I'm not gonna pick.
It's me or him. Do you want him?
Nadine,
or do you want
Nadine,
me?
this
Why
isn't a
can't you
choice.
just say me?
No,
him
I'm
or me now?
No, I'm not gonna
You know
pick.
what? Then we're done. We're done.
Fine.
Interestingly, as the audience, we're still quick to sympathize with Nadine. The thorough backstory we've been provided still connects us to our protagonist, makes us side with her, and urges us to perceive events in the same way she does. Until further inspection, Krista is but the backstabbing BFF character in Nadine's sad, sorrowful story. Removing these biased goggles, however, we can see what's really going on here. Remember that Krista has hardships too, and wince as we watch Nadine's closed-mindedness drive her down a path of self-imposed despair. And this is only a start to the ditch that her stubborn assumptions are slowly digging her down. Case in point, enter Erwin Kim and Mr. Brunner, two characters who we are already familiar with before we even get to know them. Erwin is nothing more than the verbally clumsy geek with a giant crush on our main character. We see how he could align with this stereotype in his introduction scene.
I like your sweatshirt today. It's nice.
Thank you.
Where'd you get it? The sweatshirt.
But Nadine further paints him as this timid, shy figure with numerous remarks. After first meeting him, she tells Krista that he's
Pathetic, adorable.
encouraging us not to take him seriously. When they go to the carnival later, just as friends, Nadine makes assumptions about his parents.
Your mom gets on you about your grades and practicing your instrument. She makes a great egg sandwich after years of owning a small restaurant downtown. Your dad, quiet, gruff, never really says I love you, but with his stoic presence, you know he cares.
And outwardly shares her impressions of him.
I look at you and I just see this really, really, really old man.
Old.
I'm complimenting you. I see this very kind, very gentle, very wise old man in a convalescent home, in a wheelchair.
Outlining Erwin as exactly who we thought he was. Similarly, while Mr. Brunner comes off as a gruff smartass early on,
Well, I don't know if you know this, but my dad passed away.
Date of passing?
Sorry?
When did he die?
2011.
Ooh. Yeah, I have a 1-year expiration date on freebies for the dead and dying.
We cannot determine much more about him through his own words and actions. Instead, we have to trust Nadine's assumptions to fill in the gaps. By means of some lighthearted but emotionally charged banter, Nadine confirms our immediate impressions of Mr. Brunner, an unaccomplished middle-aged man who masks his inner loneliness with sneering apathy towards his students at his miserably low-paying job.
You know, you're always in a shit mood. You're a really shitty teacher. You put zero effort into everything you do here, and there's no way you're proud of that. Look at you. Look at like you do nothing. Look at your hair. You don't do your hair because you don't have any hair. You're bald. And you know what? You know why you're not married? Because bald men are gross and they're disgusting, and especially the ones that make $45,000 a year.
We know these characters as associated teen movie archetypes because Nadine does. She knows Mr. Brunner is a bad teacher. She knows Erwin is a dork. She knows Darian is an asshole. For the first half of the film, these characters do nothing to disprove Nadine's assessments. But when she assumes Krista is a traitor, we know she is wrong. And from here, her black and white worldview starts to crumble, and the confining labels she's assigned her peers, ones that we had started to believe, begin to make less sense. As she wanders the halls looking for someone to spend lunch with, Nadine is surprised to find out that Erwin takes part in a film festival, simply because she never imagined he did. A few minutes later, after calling out Mr. Brunner, we learn that her presumptions about his earnings are not entirely accurate.
I've been doing this 23 years, and you're the first person to ever underestimate my salary.
And when he offers her a cookie out of kindness, she expects an ulterior motive.
Giving you half my cookie.
Why?
Make you feel better. Jesus.
These instances subvert previous suspicions of these characters and prove to Nadine, alongside the audience, that she needs to look past her own perspective to understand the people around her, even if she doesn't realize it yet. These subversions continue as she visits Erwin's house to escape her now lonesome home life, and is shocked to discover that he's rich. Seeing as nothing suggested that he wasn't, this detail just didn't fit Nadine's preconceived notions, but rather than acknowledging her miscalculation, she blames Erwin for his lack of communication.
When did you tell me you were rich?
Again, she hasn't caught on yet. Additionally, there's a more comedic example of Nadine's self-absorption in this same scene.
Do you want to have sex right now?
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I was just playing out the movie scene.
Despite being played for laughs, this exchange acts as yet another example of Nadine failing to look beyond herself, and Erwin humorously and appropriately responds with a song that encapsulates her egocentric attitude in the movie thus far.
Dickhead, you're such a dickhead.
Oh my
And
God.
everybody knows it, everyone but you, you're a dickhead.
By the end of this outing, having shown off a multitude of impressive art pieces, Erwin has proved to the audience that there is more to him than meets the eye. But in spite of this being the second instance where her damaging characterizations have been challenged, our protagonist sustains her problematic behavior. At school the following day, she spots Krista hanging out with new friends and refuses to get out of the car, not considering how this inconveniences her mother. Likewise, she impulsively runs off with the vehicle soon after in the wake of heated discourse, and bearing in mind that she flunked her license test, potentially endangers the lives of others on the road. Then, in this state of intense emotion, she frantically types out an explicit message to Nick Mossman and hits send by mistake.
I want to give you head. I want you to put your mouth on my tits. I want to feel you inside me. We can do it in the Petland stockroom. Nadine, you can't send this.
In visiting Mr. Brunner for consolation, we get more evidence pointing towards his real, kind-hearted nature as he grants Nadine his class period off, some money for yogurt, and his phone number in case of emergency. Still, she's so stuck in her ways, ignoring her family's calls, that her self-serving outlook on life now receives one of its final blows, this time mercilessly by way of Nick. He surprisingly responds to her text with accordance, and the two decide to meet up that night, leading to this painfully awkward scene right here. The date appears mundane at first, the pair driving around and not saying much, but when they finally park in some vacant lot and start kissing, the difference between their true intentions begins to show. We see Nadine reject further advances, and Nick frustratingly backs off, but then she comes onto him again. He resumes, and she rejects it once more. Even in light of her prior actions, it's easy to feel uncomfortable for Nadine in this moment. Nick comes off as overtly shallow, and it seems like his overtures single-handedly ruined their date, until he reminds us that it was never supposed to be a date in the first place. Nadine asked for a hookup.
What do you want?
To talk, to get to know you, not just do it in the first 5 seconds.
You wrote me a novel about how you were dying to blow me in Petland, you psycho.
From Nick's point of view, he's simply reciprocating the sexual attention that was originally asked of him. And while he certainly should respond more sensitively to her body language, the entire situation was a misunderstanding, brought upon again by Nadine's short-sighted frame of mind. And this one breaks her. This is the product of Nadine's self-induced spiral. This is her low point. Having successfully convinced herself that she's surrounded by one-note caricatures of human beings, she's overlooked their complexities, effectively driven her best friend away, and distanced herself from favorable associates like Erwin. She's hurt and alone, and still doesn't understand why, but luckily, she's left with a lifeline. As soon as Nadine arrives at her teacher's house, she's taken aback by his wife and infant son, a reveal that directly contradicts her earlier judgment and acts as the final step of Mr. Brunner's character subversion. By now, 3 separate individuals have exhibited characteristics that oppose Nadine's rigid evaluations, yet she remains blind to the harm her ideology has caused. If none of these people were able to leave an impact, it seems as if nobody could enable Nadine to question her mentality. Nobody except the person who fueled the formation of these beliefs from the start. Nobody except Darian.
I don't give a shit about you. I'm only here for me, and my life is fucking incredible. No, I love spending another night talking Mom off the ledge. I love only applying to schools nearby because who knows what'll happen in the house if I'm not around to fix it. And I love that the one person who makes me feel like I could take a fucking breath. I can't have without completely destroying you. So you're right. You're right, it's a blast.
For the first time in the film, Nadine views her own life from someone else's perspective, shattering her delusional mindset and finally allowing her to see the damage that it has done. And believe it or not, I think the audience is influenced almost identically. Since the very beginning, the movie has conditioned the viewer to think like Nadine by providing a character who seems to stay consistent with her analysis. If her perception of Darian is accurate, it seems safe to buy into the reasoning behind most of her ensuing choices, even ones as irrational as the desertion of Krista, as we're led to believe that these characters are as surface level as she preaches. It's only when this constant is broken, when Darian shares his troubles, that we can look back at everyone with fairness, starting at Krista, onto Erwin, and then Mr. Brunner. In retrospect, there are more instances of Darian forced to act as the family's peacekeeper than him doing anything unethical. It's clear that no one here fits perfectly into an archetypal box like Nadine insists, excluding, ironically, herself. Her pessimism, thoughtlessness, and self-obsession are traits that correspond impeccably with those of the most infuriatingly inconsiderate teenage protagonists, and how The Edge of 17 chooses to address this in little over 15 minutes will determine its place among the other, often emotionally manipulative stories that make use of this cliché. For comparison, Sierra Burgess is a Loser, a Netflix original about a high schooler who catfishes a guy into liking her, would be fine and far more interesting if its main character wasn't utterly exempt from all the harm she caused at the end. Instead, after faking a disability, stabbing her friend in the back, and committing a flagrant act of sexual assault, she gets to sing a sad song about her insecurities, and everyone she's hurt, including the love interest, comes crawling back. Another Netflix dramedy, The Kissing Booth, offers a similar plot to The Edge of 17, and regardless of its lackluster quality as a whole, comes close to concluding in a satisfying manner. Unfortunately, its climactic argument scene fails to commit, as the unreasonably stubborn character never becomes aware of his missteps on his own, making his last-minute change of heart feel undeserved. If The Edge of 17 was exactly the type of narrative it seemed to be from the get-go, from its marketing, from its Google synopsis, it would follow in a similar fashion. But to set itself apart from these other titles and prove its worth to the coming-of-age genre, the movie still has one last subversion up its sleeve, and it's Nadine's. Rather than being justified or excused or passed off, Nadine apologizes for all of her wrongdoings, with nothing offered in return, through a powerful monologue that doesn't validate her worldview, but sheds light on why she clings onto it so desperately.
I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for being a bitch tonight. For the past couple of weeks, and the past 17 years before that. I know this isn't any easier for you, I know that. I think some deranged part of me likes thinking I'm the only one with real problems. Like, that makes me special.
By fooling herself into thinking that everything comes so easily to those around her, Nadine can act as society's victim and rationalize choices that would be otherwise unwarranted. She finds solace in this pretend reality where her difficulties take precedence because, in short, Nadine hates herself.
You know, ever since we were little, I would get this feeling like I'm floating outside of my body, looking down at myself. And I hate when I see how I'm acting, the way I sound. And I don't know how to change it. And I'm so scared that feeling is never gonna go away.
This is less a revelation than it is a piece of information that recontextualizes earlier scenes, most obviously the two prominently featuring her father. In both, Nadine shows a lack of self-confidence that is only slightly subdued with the help of her dad. Then, we continually see signs of her inhibitions after his death, when she lacks the self-assurance to socialize at the party.
Just don't be so weird. God, why are you so awkward?
And in hindsight, this drunken speech laid everything out pretty clearly near the beginning.
I had the worst thought. I gotta spend the rest of my life with myself.
Granted, I've been pretty hard on her throughout the video so far. I never set out to belittle the circumstances that Nadine is under. I didn't want to vindicate her responses either. Alternatively, I tried to strike a balance, just as the film does, because even though her depressive and anxious state is saddening, she needs to learn a lesson. It is hard thinking the whole world is against you and that you're the only one who suffers or struggles or hurts, but it's even harder admitting that's just not true. Because when you carry so much self-hatred, from your walk to your voice to your personality, when you truly believe you don't have any talent or ability or anything to be proud of, when you constantly fall short of others' expectations or fail to challenge the successes of other people, it's comforting to fall back on the idea that it's okay because your life is shitty and everyone else has it good. As if, in some twisted way, just enduring, no matter the things you say or do, is an accomplishment in and of itself. Without this, you're left to realize that you not only have your problems, but everyone else has theirs too. And you have no excuse to handle yours so poorly. This is a disheartening epiphany to reach, but there is a silver lining, in that if everyone undergoes some sort of misery or pain, you're not facing this alone. At this point, the only character I have yet to touch upon is the mother, because unlike everyone but her husband, she doesn't function as a subverted stereotype, but as a mirror image of Nadine's self-centered tendencies. It's no coincidence that the first we see of her is in this shot, where she's busy tending to her hair before wishing Darian goodbye. She remains as self-conscious as ever years later, highlighted by how uncertain she is of her appearance before going out.
Do you like this dress? Does it look bad? I think it looks kind of bad. You know, it's kind of poofy and I don't know, do my arms look bad?
Her self-esteem is just about as weak as Nadine's, so it manifests itself through similarly egotistic habits. The earliest example of this comes when she ignores Nadine's troubles following the party, cutting her off to rant about her own tribulation.
How was it?
It was probably one of the worst nights of my life.
I had. Sorry, I look like hell.
Like her daughter, she's so preoccupied with herself that she's practically unable to see beyond her point of view and consider what others are dealing with, somehow managing to act like she's most affected by the Nadine-Krista-Darian conflict.
It really bothers me she's not giving you rides anymore, though. I'm gonna have to talk to her about that.
Even when it comes to Darian, a character who she is shown to have a great fondness of, the mother has little interest in hearing out his side of the story, and favors a peaceful household above all else.
Is it worth turning the house into a war zone?
These negative qualities of both Nadine and her mom clash multiple times throughout the story, and once the viewer has picked up on the parallels between the two, specific moments begin to alter. Sure, Nadine avoiding Krista here risks the mother arriving late to work, but the mom reacts with no pity and forces her to tag along out of spite. True, Nadine straight up steals a car, but only due to a scathingly nasty comment said by her mother.
Your dad would be so disappointed in the way you're turning out.
The point isn't to decide which party is in the wrong in each scenario, but to recognize that both view each other as two-dimensional enemies when surely neither is. Their incompatibility is best showcased here, when they fail to acknowledge the effect that the father's passing had on the other person.
If my husband had any idea what I was gonna have to deal with.
I love how you refer to him as your husband.
He is my husband.
You can run off and get a new husband. What he is my dad. Can't you just say that occasionally?
What's most ironic about this dynamic, though, is the fact that the mom gives Nadine advice akin to what she will eventually learn in the movie's climax, yet she herself is unable to apply these words to her own life.
Here's what I do when I'm feeling down. I get very quiet and very still. And I say to myself, everyone in the world is as miserable and empty as I am. They're just better at pretending.
As did Nadine, this character seems like a lost cause, but once again, all it takes is blunt interjection from Darian to permanently offset her harmful self-fixation.
Okay, all right, stop, just give it to me.
Hey!
Just give me the bag.
Hey, I am the adult here, not you.
Then why do you always call me?
Initially sharing the same shallow belief system when it comes to understanding other individuals, the mother and Nadine have made assumptions about Darian that undermine his true character. The former has treated him as a well-behaved, perfect child, capable of keeping the family grounded during tough times, leading the latter to see him as an arrogant family favorite, privileged with receiving everything on a silver platter. Both of these judgments disregard the persistent amount of pressure he faces filling in for his father, so when he brings this to light to these characters through two separate instances of eye-opening dialogue, they can finally shed their narrow-minded perspectives together and begin treating their peers, and in turn themselves, better. For example, in a conclusion more realistic and satisfying than something like Sierra Burgess could offer, Nadine uses her newfound outlook to start making amends with Krista, and more importantly, accepts her and Darian's romantic relationship.
Have a good day, both of you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Can I call you later?
Okay.
There isn't a reason why she needs to continue isolating herself, as she now knows that her brother and best friend never set out to hurt her, and with time, this kind of compassion could prove beneficial for all three of them. Now, the true testament of the mother's growth only works in correspondence with Nadine's. We've established that the pair have been at each other's throats for the longest time, and for about a day, Nadine cut off all contact with her mom, unconcerned of how worried she might have been while away. Here, however, after realizing the error of her ways, she makes an effort to put her mother at ease. And in reply, the mom shows her first signs of improvement by ditching the aggressive messages she wants to send in favor of a simple one that takes into account the experiences her daughter has been going through. No longer being rigidly locked into their own points of view, these characters can get along with those around them to a higher degree, and though these are just the first steps towards the self-improvement that Nadine and her mom are seeking, they're effective ones. The last scene of the film depicts our protagonist, having left behind her original off-base presumptions about him, embracing who Erwin actually is at the premiere of his movie, and due to this, she herself is supported by the public. Needless to say, this ending provides something more substantial than what would be expected from a standard teen-focused narrative, and really, this sentiment could be extended to describe the whole movie. What looked to be another victim of commonplace coming-of-age cliches and stereotypes, The Edge of 17 defies all odds and works as the opposite. Not only does it play with the audience's expectations of its archetypal supporting cast, but it deconstructs one of its genre's most tiresome tropes, the implementation of an insensitively melodramatic main character. The film walks a tricky tightrope, getting us to relate sufficiently with Nadine where we care for her, yet exposing so many of her flaws that we can remain critical, resulting in a thorough exploration of this character type and an honest look at deteriorating self-acceptance. Fit with exceptional performances and a great sense of humor, I think this story is smart enough to sit alongside genre-defining satires like Mean Girls, and set a new precedent for teen media going forward. Strangely, even with this analysis in mind, and considering the widespread appraisal the movie received upon its release, one particular point of criticism seems to carry across several discussions that, to me, undermines the big takeaway. This being that Hailee Steinfeld seems too conventionally attractive to pull off playing someone like Nadine. To say this would imply that pretty people can't struggle with their emotions, mental health, or self-image, and more so, promote the idea that nothing lies beneath the surface, a view that directly counteracts what this film stands for. Not everything is exactly as it seems. Sometimes things can be different, sometimes they can be worse, but in the case of this movie and the life of Nadine Franklin, they can be better.